Hello and welcome back to CamBro Conversations. Today's conversation, I'm delighted to be joined by Laura Dempster, the Thrifty Londoner. Laura, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me.
I'm delighted to have you. And the first question that has to come to my lips is, when did you start to have to become thrifty?
Well, I started becoming a bit thrifty when I moved to London, which was about 5 years ago now, just over 5 years ago. And I found myself on a low income with London living costs. So I had to kind of be a bit more savvy about how to spend my money. And yeah, I kind of got started with my job, was spending money as normal, and then thought, oh my God, I'm going to have a massive problem if I don't kind of take better care of my money and how I'm managing it. So that was where my interest, let's say, in budgeting began, and it has kind of snowballed from there, really. I think one thing I do like to say is that I personally think there's a difference in being thrifty and being frugal. So I would say frugality is kind of more about pinching the pennies and living on as little as possible, whereas I would like to think that thrifty is more about spending your money in the way that best serves you. So, you know, saving some money but still spending enough to have a great time. So that was what I endeavoured to do when I moved to London, because I didn't want to miss out on everything that the city has to offer, but also I didn't want to end up in tons of debt.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. And there are some negative connotations when people talk about thrift, frugality, penny pinching is like one of the terms that you were kind of going towards there. And in fact, I think being cost conscious is quite a nice term, isn't it? And it makes you, I suppose it makes you feel a bit more responsible, Laura, given that, like you say, you've maybe never had this pressure on your income before, but when you moved to London and the costs were so much higher than where you were before, which we can definitely get into, it's very interesting to see like that light bulb come on in your head where you have to make a choice between, do I just embrace maybe the classic London lifestyle where there's a lot less people saving, or you have to be a lot more cost conscious and decide, I want to still experience London and I'm not going to be frugal, I'm going to be thrifty, and I'm going to make decisions that are based on maybe my values or what I want to spend on, rather than just what is societally decided that I need to spend my money on.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, there are in London and in all major cities, you know, there's plenty of free and low cost ways to enjoy yourself as well. Like you know, you don't have to be spending loads and loads of money every week on eating out, food, drinks, just to enjoy your time there. So yeah, I would totally agree with that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to give a bit of background before you came to London. What was your relationship with money like? What was your maybe need to be focused on money like?
Well, before I moved to London, I was a student. I lived in Manchester actually after graduating from uni, and even though I was still on a low income in Manchester, don't get me wrong, but the cost of living was also a lot lower. So I didn't find myself in so much trouble. I must say I've always been quite good with money. My parents kind of have been pretty good role models. Like my brother and I were quite fortunate because our parents kind of drummed into us that we should always save some money. You know, if we ever got any birthday money, they'd be saying like, oh, you have to save it, you know. And they very much instilled like this kind of saving mentality. So, you know, we'd wash the car for £1 or whatever, and then save up our money to buy a toy that we wanted or something like that. So they always kind of led us really well in that respect to look after our money and have good money management skills. And yeah, when I was in Manchester, I was still careful as well, but yeah, my cost of living just wasn't as high as it was in London. So
it
wasn't
what was
so
that
much of
coming
an
from?
issue.
Coming from rent in London primarily, or what do you think else was kind of spiking costs?
Yeah, rent was big. And so I think rent and bills was about £700 a month, just, in a house share, plus my train travel to work was about another £100 a month, plus food, socializing, all the other things. It very quickly added up. So I think compared to, I think my room in Manchester might have been about £400. So yeah, it was a pretty significant difference. And plus I didn't have the travel costs either. So I just didn't have, it wasn't a necessity for me to keep such a close eye on my spending, just because, it was lower cost of living. I'm sure it has increased a lot now since then. I hear Manchester's, the place to be. But that I would say my history with money isn't terrible. I've never been in debt, but I've not been the best with money. I could certainly have been better as a teenager and in my early 20s.
And there was less pressure on you, importantly. And I think when you come under pressure, you soon understand things like, looking back at, all mum and dad encouraged my brother and I to save and encouraged us to do odd jobs to generate a little bit of cash. And we'll definitely come onto that in this podcast based on what you've been up to nowadays, Laura. But it's interesting to see that obviously we've quoted like a £300 difference there for starters in rent. And then if we talk about Manchester as a city, it's a lot more commutable by foot or by tram. And it's probably a lot shorter distances than London, where you were telling me you stay West London. And I know that when I go down for work and maybe I'm in Beckton, people can be like, oh, let's meet up for dinner. And they're maybe in like Wandsworth. And me not being like clued up on London will be like, yeah, no problem at all. But that's like an hour traveling and maybe like £7, £8, £9, £10, whatever it is on the tube. And it's interesting how those costs would rack up versus if you're got like a really low cost commute to work as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I've actually just started a new job. And for the last 4 years, I've walked to work for my previous employer, which was great, 0 cost involved. And now I'm commuting, which is an hour on the tube plus £6.50 a day, I think it is. It's still not as expensive as some people's commutes, but it's a big difference. And it's weird how in London it's perfectly normal to travel like an hour to see your friend for dinner. Like, not sure if there's anywhere else like that in the country.
No, not at all. And I always say this to friends, like, that's the distance that is Glasgow to Edinburgh, and nobody on a weeknight would go from Glasgow to Edinburgh for dinner with a friend. Like, I would be so surprised if anyone is partaking that behavior. But that again is just the nature of London, where I think it's highly social, and with that, of course, comes a fiscal cost as well as a time spent when you're moving as well. So when you moved to London from Manchester, did you find that you were spending more socially as part of that maybe societal demand or kind of pressure?
Yeah, 100%. So, I didn't really know many people when I moved to London either. So it was going out with my housemates, socializing with people at work, and you kind of do it to make new friends as well. Like, when you're new to a city, that's a really important part of why you live in the city, is to meet new people. So yeah, there was definitely a lot more spending, or maybe not even more spending, but just more expensive spending when compared to Manchester. So I think, well, in Manchester, I think you can probably go out for dinner for less than £10, whereas in London it's usually quite a lot more. So there's that as well. Yeah,
in the back of my head, there's a reason that the term like London waiting comes into it with a lot of jobs when you apply for it. Like I've seen a lot of jobs advertised where if you got a job and say you did the same job in Glasgow, where I'm from, or Manchester, or somewhere in the north, you can expect a percentile increase if you do the same job in London for many roles, but not for all, of course. And if that percentage doesn't come in, then that's going towards your cost of living, and it's going to hurt the bottom line at the end of the month after tax.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So when you had this moment where you thought, right, I'm going to have to flip the switch a wee bit, and I'm not irresponsible with my money, but I'm going to need to be more responsible and more focused, what were the initial big costs that you needed to address?
I think for me, one of the main ones was like food. I know that is a funny one, and it's one that I've kind of actually backtracked on a bit now, but you know, I kind of made use of things like batch cooking, using my freezer, things like that, rather than wasting food, which I was really guilty of doing. And, you know, it seemed like I was just in the shop every single day buying stuff, rather than planning out things a little bit better. I'd be throwing a lot of stuff away, and I just wasn't very mindful about how I was shopping. And so that was one thing I did address. But on the topic of food, I know lots of your listeners are very into fitness and no doubt meal planning and things like that. And I have actually recently been on a bit more of a wellness journey myself, and I had to increase my food budget quite a bit to accommodate the types of food I want to be eating, and that was actually quite tricky because it felt like it went against everything that I had previously been doing, but I think, yeah, in some situations it goes back to that whole thrifty idea, which is, you know, you spend your money in the places where you're going to get most value. And, you know, if something's really important to you, like improving my diet was, it's worth spending the money on, you know, so especially when it comes to things like health. So yeah, that was just a bit of a side note, but
a great side note though, and I completely agree. Like when we're thinking about return on investment, and we're going to come on to investments, as anyone that's heard you speak or tuned into your content before knows, you're very passionate in that area. Of course, if we look at our body and our mind and how we feel as an investment, then the food that we put into it is massively important. And like you say, if you're going on this wellness journey where you maybe want to be a little bit healthier, a little bit fitter, unfortunately, in today's society, those foods unbelievably cost a little bit more than maybe the hyper palatable, higher calorie, less nutrient dense foods that we can pick up for multi-pack deals all the time in the supermarket, or at the door or at the till when they're, get 3 for £1, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, like I've just paid X amount for these apples and this banana, whereas I can get these 3 chocolate bars for less. It is very challenging, but I guess if it's in line with your values as you've outlined there, then of course it's worth maybe that little bit extra bit of your budget going towards that than it maybe previously did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, one of the things I did to reduce my cost massively was to budget, and that's something you can do to decide where your money's going to go. I think budgeting's not necessarily about just cutting back in all areas. It's kind of like a money plan, a plan for your money on where everything's going to go and how much you're going to allocate to each area and things like that. So, you know, if food, fitness is really important to you, you will allocate more of your money towards that, and then maybe spend less on other things. You know, maybe travel isn't so important, and so maybe you spend a little bit less in that category, or you allocate less money to that category every month. So yeah, that's a big thing that I did as well, and it really helped me look at the numbers, because I'd have, let's say, work travel, my rent, my bills, grocery shopping, socializing, travel, something like that, as my different categories. And it made me look back on previous months, see where I'd been spending my money in each of those categories, and work out where I could spend a bit less. And I put it all in an Excel I put it all in an Excel spreadsheet, and just kind of figured out what I could get away with in each category. So yeah, I think it's helpful to do that, and it's helpful to really look back over the last 3 months to see what you're actually spending, because it's all very well to say, yeah, I spend around £100 a month on socializing, but the figure might actually surprise you. It might be way more, it might be way less. You don't really know that until you actually dig deep and look at those bank statements. So it can be a bit of a laborious task, but I think once you've done it, you know, you have that information, you have that data for yourself to use, and yeah, you can use it to make a really great budget for yourself.
Yeah, many of the people that listen to a self-development based podcast will appreciate that what gets measured gets managed. And of course, there's that arduous, laborious task of the data input and the data collection. But once you have that information, like you said, it can inform your decision making moving forward. And it might well be that, okay, well, if I do cut back in this particular area, it means that I'm going to assign this extra £50 a month to this area that I actually really care about. Whereas this other area, I wouldn't mind if I didn't do that nearly as often. And it's very empowering when you feel like your money's going towards what you actually care about, rather than maybe looking out the door on maybe some subscriptions that you haven't hardly used at all. It might well be that you share a Netflix account anyway, but best believe you've been paying for it, or you've been paying for YouTube Premium, and you can't remember the last time that you watched the video on YouTube, or you maybe you wouldn't be that fussed if there was a couple of adverts on the 3 videos that you watch a month, but you've been signed up for the $9.99 for however long.
Absolutely, like all of these little subscriptions, you know, to different apps, different, you know, TV watching services, magazines, they just add up like crazy. And so it is really useful to look out for those on your bank statements as well. And if something really isn't adding something to your life, just get rid of it, and you probably won't miss it. And if you do, you can always resubscribe. So yeah, I would definitely encourage people to have a look at what they're subscribed to, even write it all out, see what it totals, and see how they feel about that figure.
That's an interesting one, because when it's down on paper in front of you, it might feel different to when you're thinking, oh yeah, it's just $9.99, or oh, it's just $7.99, or it's just $14.99. In your head, that's fine, but when you total it and you're thinking, well, actually, which of these do I really value, this particular service or this level of service, and which of these could I wake up tomorrow and I wouldn't have a second thought that I didn't have this available to me?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. One of the areas I've heard you speak passionately about before is buying secondhand. What were the main items that you saw success with in this area?
So I like to say that you can buy pretty much anything secondhand. So I buy everything from like clothing, furniture, homeware, literally everything. Like I've bought a microphone secondhand, books, literally pretty much anything you can get secondhand. Some notable ones I've got an Yves Saint Laurent blouse for £5. That was a good one. And yeah, I think I love buying secondhand just because you can find really unique items as well. But yeah, you know, you can look on eBay, Depop, Vinted, Gumtree, Facebook Marketplace. Literally, there's so many online marketplaces where you can get things. But also charity shops are a great place to go as well to get secondhand items. So yeah, usually my rule is if I want something new, I just go on eBay or I go online, see what's available secondhand. Often people are selling things new with tags anyway, which, you know, is amazing. So there's a chance it might not have even been worn. And usually I can get myself a bargain. So yeah.
I'm really interested that you say your first port of call is eBay, because I think the generation that we're in, and particularly the younger generation, we're wired to go straight to Amazon. And
yeah,
type in whatever it is that we need because it's got that next day delivery. If we've got Prime and we're paying for it, of course, and we're wired to just go, right, okay, that's where I'm going to go. Whereas you've just said there that quite often you're going to go onto eBay and you're going to get the item for you with tags or whatever else. So one of my friends recently, one of the big things that he's passionate about is buying iPhone handsets outright rather than paying up over the duration of a contract. Because quite often you make a significant saving. Unless, of course, O2 or somebody's got an unbelievable deal where they want to tie you in. But he went and bought his handset brand new on eBay, and I would never have thought. I would have just gone to the Apple store and thought, and again, I made a saving on the iPhone that I bought versus the paying up over the course of a contract from Apple. But he made an even bigger saving than that because on eBay it was a very reputable seller, loads of reviews, wasn't falling off the back of a truck or some sort of dodgy deal. But it's very funny how just that short habit breaking behavior can mean that you save pounds and pounds and pounds across multiple purchases.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's insane, and people are always getting rid of stuff. They're always listing stuff. So if there is a specific item, if there's a particular brand of, I don't know, let's say a microphone, now that we're doing a podcast that you want to purchase, you can put in a saved search for that term. So when something does get listed, you'll get an email notification. So it's not like you have to even be checking it every day to check if an item's been listed. You can actually just be notified automatically, which is great too if you're willing to wait. Sometimes there is a bit of a wait involved, but
I was going to say, as instant as Amazon. Yeah, you definitely come across as a patient person, and I think when it comes to money management, having a level of patience has a delayed gratification effect to it, where if I'm willing to wait a little bit longer till somebody lists the blue snowball microphone, if we're staying on that particular example, then I don't mind because I don't need it next day. Whereas if I go on Amazon and I'm willing to spend the full RRP, then of course I need to just bite the bullet. But if I'm willing to wait and I maybe don't need it for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is, then if I get the notification, best believe you go on and you snap it up at a bargain. And it's just a case of figuring out where your values lie, where your personality type is in that regard. And I guess you can reap the rewards if that ticks those boxes for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always say also that a lot of being good with money, if you like, or good money management is often about planning ahead. And it does require that level of patience sometimes. It does require that organization, but the rewards can really pay off. And I know we're going to talk about investing later, but that's another example of being patient with your investments can really benefit you as well. So
no doubt about it. I think before we move on to investing more, I'd love to talk about what I would call the kind of great renting versus buying debate. And I think your circumstances in London probably differ for a lot of people. And I think the Thrifty Londoner, as your kind of title, means that obviously that's an audience that you speak to quite a lot. So I'd love to hear from a London perspective, how does the kind of the thought process go when it comes to renting versus buying? Because it must differ to other cities just based on the costs involved.
Yeah, I think so. I think the thing with London is that a lot of people don't come here to work and then stay here long term. So that's one of the reasons, one of many reasons that I haven't bought in London myself, is because I don't see myself settling and living in London forever. And so for me, it wouldn't make sense, even if I was going to live in London for another 5 years, it still wouldn't make sense for me to buy somewhere and up sticks in 5 years, because of the extra costs involved when you move house and all the rest of it. So that's one thing I think a lot of people don't buy, just because it is quite a transient city. The other reason is that it's obviously really expensive, and a lot of the time you would be paying more in your mortgage payments than you would be in rent. So, for example, if I was to buy this flat that I rent right now, I'd be putting down all my savings as a deposit, and then my mortgage repayments would be a lot more than I currently pay in rent. So it just doesn't make sense for me at this moment. It means that I can be really flexible. You know, if I got a new job in Manchester, I could just give my notice on this flat and then head up to Manchester. I don't have any roots put down, if you like. So for me, that's a few reasons why renting is so appealing in London, and I think a lot of people would feel the same. I think the other thing is that you pay an extortionate amount. So I think in this building block that I'm in, I think a 1-bedroom flat is about 400k, and it's tiny. So you just can't get any space for your money either. So it's not really an attractive, I don't know, I just don't really find it an attractive idea to buy something in London myself. That said, people do, but I think you have to be really sure about wanting to stay here long term. Whereas I'm sure in other areas of the UK, it's completely different. You know, you want the extra space, you want the extra flexibility, and I think a lot of the time houses are cheaper, so it might make more financial sense. You might, if you're in a quieter, less busy city, you might feel like you want to settle down, and so it just makes sense to buy somewhere if you can.
Yeah, I completely resonate with all the points you made, and particularly around the transit nature of London, where many people in our demographic, kind of coming up for 30, early 30s, they are working in London to build and establish their career and live a particular lifestyle. And then when it comes to the thought of maybe family and progressing the career in another way, they feel that outside of London's more of an option for them, because particularly to have the space to bring up a family for starters.
Yeah,
because you said there about the cost to buy a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom. Raising a child in that environment would be hectic. That was actually, I think that was the demographic of people that I thought would have had the hardest time during the really strict first 10-week lockdown that we had at the start of COVID. Because if you had a family in like a high rise or like a London property where there's not a lot of like greenery outside or a lot of space within your apartment, and you were working from home, I could only imagine that would have been a lot more challenging than many of us had it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so many people, you know, especially in kind of the more inner city areas of London, like you say, there's literally no green space around. You couldn't go to playgrounds with children. You couldn't go to the park and sit down. You know, like we were at one point, we were only allowed to go out once a day for an hour or something, weren't we? So yeah, I can't imagine what that would have been like.
Yeah, wild. And I think onto your kind of second and third point around living in London and buying in London, it's if the sums just don't add up, where you have to put in this huge amount of capital initially to put down a deposit, and then on top of that, you're actually paying out more in your mortgage than you would in your rental cost. That for me is a red flag, even if you were to move away as an investment, because best believe if you were to move away and it became a buy-to-let property, you're not actually making much money back, because you in fact, you might even be making a loss if the rental payments are less than your mortgage payment. What a crazy world we live in when that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I always wonder, I think our landlords bought this place like years ago and for a lot less than what it's worth now. So I think they must be paying a much smaller amount in the mortgage. But yeah, it's crazy.
The value of property's gone up so much, hasn't it? So that's why like many London landlords, if you or your family bought a particular time, you are effectively sitting on a gold mine, because rents are still high, and like your rent will still be high versus what maybe some other people would pay in another city for size of apartment or whatever else. and I know you've shopped around, so I know you've got a good deal. But even to compare to other cities, it's not the same, is it? And they're able to let it at that price because they know that they got it for a fraction of the cost years and years and years ago. So very, very, very interesting debate on that. And I think people that got into that particular market at the right time, of course, they want to sit on it and rent it as an asset. But for most people that work there, it's very, very difficult for them to find the capital to put that down, and instead save where they can, which we're obviously going to get onto, and invest where they can to generate capital to make a purchase when they do escape the city.
Yeah.
So we've got control of some of our costs. We're being conscious of our budget. Where do you even start with investing, and when was your first kind of exposure to it?
So to be honest, I think my first exposure to investing was this message of don't do it. It's really risky, you know, you're a fool to invest money. And that's the kind of messaging I got just through family, friends, and you know, I'm not from a family that has any kind of, you know, no one in my family works in finance. None of my friends work in finance, so it's kind of something that I hadn't had much exposure to at all. So I think I'm trying to think when I first kind of got into it. I think I was just looking into personal finance for Thrifty Londoner, and as I delved deeper and deeper into various things, I found out more and more about the world of personal finance. So, you know, everyone's pension is invested, for example. So most people are already investors, and they might not even know it. So that's when I realized, okay, actually, you know, things might not be quite as they seem. And so maybe these people saying don't invest are probably thinking about a different type of investing, or, you know, they obviously haven't experienced it themselves, or perhaps they don't even know themselves that their pension is invested. So yeah, I kind of started looking into it more and more, and yeah, that's kind of
the start point
where I got to with it. Yeah, that made me think about it as an option for myself. Definitely not coming from a banking background or anything like that, and I did put off investing for about a year after I decided I wanted to. I just wanted to make absolutely certain that I was doing the right thing, and I just hesitated for a long time. And so that's something I want to kind of, I don't know, normalize through Thrifty Londoner, is that, you know, you can be in your 20s, you can be doing a regular job without a background in finance, and you can be an investor, and, you know, anyone can do it. So yeah, that's definitely a message I want to put out there.
Yeah, and it's a great message, because I think when we talk about risk, and my parents were very similar to yours in that regard, where you were saying that they were very encouraging of saving, and my dad was a terrific saver and he was very thrifty, and I recognized that as a boy growing up, that dad was very money conscious, but he had no risk tolerance to investing at all. Never talked about the stock market, never talked about anything really money related, other than like saving up and making sure that you had money for a rainy day. That was the kind of one of the phrases that stuck in my head. And when I first got exposed to like putting money into stocks and shares, ISA, and picking a couple of funds, my dad was like, "Oh, like, have you read up on these funds? Like, how do you know it's all going to work?" And it's very funny, because you just said there one of the biggest things that many people won't even consider: the private pension or the public pension that they're paying is being invested somewhere, and not just on your behalf, without you having any knowledge. Well, you can ask for that information, but you pretty much would struggle to know whether it's being invested in a property portfolio, whether it's being invested in residential, whether it's being invested in offices. You have no idea really where that money is going. When did you start to look into like pensions and things like that? Because I think that's quite a good entry point for a lot of people.
Yeah, so I started thinking about pensions. Well, really, when my employer was doing the minimum payments at the time, which I think at the time was about 2%. And then I was paying 3%, I think. That was just, what I was auto-enrolled onto. And I think I just happened to think, oh, what is 3% of my salary? And then I thought, that isn't gonna, if I save this much every year for, invest that in my pension every year for this many years, I'm not going to have much to retire on. I was like, this is basically nothing. And so it got me thinking, what are the other options? And, it just got me thinking about the future and thinking, what does that mean for me? And it started off this whole train of thought about what do I actually want my future to look like? And I don't know about you, but I quite often hear things like, people in their 20s and 30s are going to be working until 70 or 75 or whatever the age might be. And I just thought that sounds really depressing. And I didn't really want that for myself. So there's some really great online calculators which you can use to just work out little scenarios and see, how much you need to put in your pension or put in a stock and shares ISA, like you say, each month, and how that might look and what age you might be able to retire at and how much you might be able to retire with, etc. So you can model out lots of different scenarios, which I love to do. I think it gives you a bit of a bigger picture on where you need to be to have your ideal retirement. And I know retirement sounds so boring and pensions sounds so boring, but it's just, I can't express enough how important it is that we look after ourselves in the future. And retirement doesn't have to mean like old age. It can mean 50 or like 45, or in the case of a previous podcast guest of yours, 35. So it's really down to us. And I think I had the realization that the earlier you sort this stuff out, the better, because you will receive interest on your investment, interest on your pension, and that just compounds over time. So the earlier you get started, the better.
Yeah, such a good message, Laura. And dropping the term in there, compound interest, is massive. So, of course, that year that you lost to investing, where you were making sure that you felt comfortable with what you were doing, in the grand scheme of things, nothing. But of course, we want to start as early as possible so that we start to benefit year on year from those interests building on top of each other. And starting at the age where many of the people that listen to this podcast are at, you will be in a good position in the future just by giving yourself the opportunity to move forward rather than delaying, because 1 year for you could have turned into 5 years, and that could be tens, hundreds of thousands of pounds over the longer term if you'd procrastinated on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important as well to, if you get a really strong reaction from someone, especially if they're a loved one or a friend, that they're like, oh my God, no, it's so dangerous, it's so risky, it can really put you off and think, oh, like, okay, maybe this isn't for me. But yeah, I would definitely encourage people to read around the topic and make sure that they have the facts, because a lot of people who are saying, oh, it's really risky, could be thinking of a friend who's invested in one company that's gone bust and they've had a really bad experience. Like, we don't know where other people have got certain beliefs from. So I think, yeah, it's really important to do your own research and come to your own conclusions, especially when it comes to investing, because historically there has been so much kind of scaremongering about the topic, I would say. So really important to do research.
Lots of mistaken connotations and associations with trading which is
yes,
of course very high risk. And we laughed there about somebody retiring at 35. Steve Adcock, who's been on the podcast, and he's a firm believer that 99% of investors should be index fund investors and not picking stocks. And
I would share that belief.
And this guy is somebody who has over $1 million in invested funds across the board, and he's not trying to pick or short or long the next stock. He's just very much just piling money into a tracker. And I find that very interesting, because that's over time continued to perform ahead of our cash ice in the bank or our current account's interest rate. And that's how people have built wealth, and almost generational wealth, where it's freed them from the cycle of work early. Regarding pensions, I wanted to ask, a lot of companies do like a minimum amount that you can add in from your thing, but they also do like a match. That was one of the things for me that really excited me. I don't know whether you dived into that area of things either, Laura.
Yes. So like it can be incredible when your employer matches your pension to a good percentage. So you know, they might do something where they say we'll match you up to 10%, for example. So they might put in 5% as standard, but they say, you know, if you put in 10%, we'll put in 10%. And some places might even just give you 10% no matter what. But it's really important to pay attention to this. It's probably written in your contract or something like that. And it can make an astronomical difference. So my fiance worked at a company for just a year, but they had an amazing pension scheme. I've never worked somewhere with a great pension scheme, and his pension is worth like so much more than mine. He's already leaps ahead of me just because of that 1 year and that particular job. So it's a really great way to build wealth, and it's literally free money. Like your employer is giving you extra money towards your retirement. So I would definitely look into that and include it in your retirement calculations as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. And the term free money, it sounds too good to be true, but it is one of those opportunities that you really need to be aware of, where if an employer is willing to match you, that's just capital coming from them. It's not coming off your salary. Your contribution is your contribution. Their contribution just tops it up, and it's a great opportunity to level it up. And I think your fiance's example, where he probably had a really strong percentage match, has radically shifted his finances within 1 year. It's exciting in that regard. I've asked you a big question when it's come to renting versus buying. What about credit cards versus debit cards? Where do you stand?
So I like to use both. I think credit cards, again, are something that have perhaps been a bit demonized. And of course, you can get into trouble using credit cards, if you're spending money that you don't have to spend, it can be a risk. I just pay my credit card off in full every month. And there are some really big positives to using credit cards. If you use it to book travel, for example, you're protected if an airline goes bust, for example. The airline and your credit card provider are both equally responsible for you getting your money back, and you don't get that same protection with a debit card. So I would say it's a must for booking travel and things like that, as long as you pay it off and avoid the interest. And one thing that is actually my New Year's resolution is to use credit cards in a more savvy way. So I don't know if you follow many American influencers or American financial influencers, but a lot of them kind of do loads of credit card hacks, and they have loads of travel hacks that they do, and they use like this card for this card for that, and they get like free hotel room stays and all these kinds of things. And I haven't really seen many people in the UK doing that. If you know anyone, do let me know. But yeah, that's my kind of resolution, is to look into that a little bit more, and see how I could be using my credit cards in the best way possible to get as many points, cash back, all these kinds of extra things. It's just a little experiment. But yeah, I like them both for different purposes.
I'll be excited to see where you go with that. And I'll share in a wee second an example I've got of one that's been quite interesting for me recently. But the first point I think you make is that your money management of the credit card effectively makes it like a slightly delayed debit card. Whereas if you are building up credit and paying interest on top of that, it's one of the single worst loans you can ever get, because you're just going to get hammered. And with I've used an Amex for years since I left university and got my graduate jobs, because I had a lot of expenses with car mileage or train tickets or hotels that I was putting on my card and claiming back from the company. And I just set up a direct debit. It comes out on the 12th of every month when my bill comes. And albeit I have to have the money in my account and know that that's going to be there, but I also just know that, oh, well, it's 3 weeks down the line from when I made these purchases, or roughly that. But as long as I never ever have an outstanding balance on it, I kind of feel comfortable. When I first got that card though, Laura, I think the first year I got like between 2.5% to 3% cash back on it, and that was like hundreds of pounds at the time, because I was booking all these hotels every month and paying all my fuel, my mileages. But that went down quite quickly because it was a kind of initial offer to grab you. Although some of these American influencers that you're talking about, they'll do that initial period, rinse the offer, and then move on to the next card that has the same thing. They just switch around all the time.
That is that one of the hack things. Okay, I'm gonna have to look into this more.
Yeah,
it's really interesting. I think there are lots of different ways that you can kind of hack these things. Like one thing I'm trying to do at the moment with my Amex is get a companion voucher for travel through the Avios points. So fingers crossed for that.
Yeah, you'll make it happen. The one thing that some of my friends have been speaking about is a crypto.com card. Now, I have maybe about a third of my overall investments are crypto now. Just in the last kind of 18 months, it's been quite exciting. I've become comfortable enough with the risk, and I'm happy to invest in it, which I think a lot of people, they'll either never get there or they need the time to do that. It has a card where it has different tiers depending on how much crypto you stake on their app. So if you stake, I think one of my friends has staked about £300 worth of their token in an exchange, and then he's getting like a really high percentage back on purchases, and it's just like a Visa card. So he's spending it on all his other bills that he normally would, all his other purchases he normally would, but he's just getting a really good cash back, albeit you've got £300 invested in the market that is at risk and capital at risk, which is something you need to be comfortable with. But equally, it's quite I think you would call it like a stable coin in crypto. So it's like it roughly sits pegged against the dollar or the pound. But that's an interesting one that people are raving about. And he has sent me some of the details. And depending how much you stake, if you have a bit more capital, if you stake £1,000 in their token, you're getting a really high percentage back on all your purchases. So that's something I need to take more of a look at, and maybe we'll pick this up offline, Laura, once we do our research.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting.
What other technology do you use in your money management? Because you've got this spreadsheet that you use to track your budget. What other technology comes to mind that you like to use?
I use all sorts, to be honest. I like to use a budgeting app. So I really enjoy using Monzo. They have the saving pots feature. So if I've got an expense coming up, well, I have loads of pots actually in Monzo for all different types of things. But you know, if you've got a holiday coming up, or even if you just want to, I don't know, buy a pair of shoes which are like £80 or something, it's a really nice way to save up for these purchases. You can set a little picture to show what you're saving towards and things like that. So I love doing that because it keeps it separate from the rest of your everyday spending. And also with Monzo, you can set a budget and it will automatically categorize your spending. So if you're not into Excel, that's a really great way to track your spending, see where your money's going each month. And it's all kind of done automatically. So there's not really too much input from you to see what your kind of spending looks like, in terms of the categories and where you're spending your money, who with, and yeah, it kind of tells you, it updates every time you spend and tells you how much you've got left. So you'll get a notification being like, your eating out budget is about to run out, and things like that. So yeah, I really like Monzo as well. Yeah, and then I love the calculator, which I know is just a really obvious one, but one thing I really like to do is just to, I don't know, look at different scenarios, kind of think about when I'm going to get to a certain goal. You know, if I cancel Netflix every month, not that I'm doing that, but let's say I'm cancelling Netflix every month, how much does that add up to over a year? Things like that. I just love the calculator too.
Yeah, because it helps you display that bigger picture. Like when you said about writing down all the subscriptions on a piece of paper in front of you, when you multiply by 12, maybe that number or the number per individual subscription, you quickly work out whether it's in line with your values and in line with what you want to spend on. Very, very interesting. Beyond saving and investing, you talk a lot now about side projects and passive income. Where is the start point for people on that?
In terms of passive income, and side hustles, side projects, side businesses, whatever you might want to call them, I think the first thing is to just get a bit curious about it. I think, you know, I would definitely encourage people to take their time over thinking what they might want to do as a side project, and where they see that going. So do a massive brainstorm to start with, basically, and just think, what do you enjoy? How much time do you have? How much do you want to earn from your side project? Would you like your side project to be your full-time project, your full-time business one day? And yeah, like what you generally want your lifestyle to look like, whether that's now or in the future or both. Because, you know, I've had experiences before where I've started off a side hustle and I've really reached a ceiling point with it. So I used to hand embroider t-shirts and sell them on Etsy, and there's only so many t-shirts you can embroider of an evening after work, and I just realized this isn't sustainable over time. It isn't something I can make a lot of money from, although, you know, it's a nice hobby to do. It wasn't gonna make me the kind of money that I really wanted to be making. And yeah, so I would encourage people to really look further down the line and see what they want from their side business. Because, and don't get me wrong, you might be thinking, oh, I just want an extra £100 a month or something. But when you get into it, you might decide to pivot a little bit and decide that actually, you know, you are looking for a more lucrative side hustle. You do want to take it full time, so you might kind of chop and change, and that's fine. You know, like your idea will change and evolve as you go on. But I think thinking about the bigger picture from the start can stand you in really good stead. And if you do want to get serious about something, I think it's a really good idea to have a business plan, which I know sounds really intense, but it doesn't have to be really intense. Like, it can just be a few points, you know, about who your customer is, what you're looking to achieve, what is the purpose of what you're doing, and what you want to get out of it, as well as what you want your customer to get out of it. And it just helps keep you on track and helps you take things seriously from the start. Because if you work 9 to 5 like you and I do. You know, your time is limited, so you do want to be maximizing that time as much as possible.
And so much of what you said there, Laura, is value-based. And I think it speaks to the fact that you will very likely burn out, stop, quit, or not adhere to what is necessary to scale the side hustle if it doesn't align with something that you actually kind of want to do. And there's probably an equation somewhere between fiscal return and like how much you care about it. And it's the same in our day jobs as well, isn't it? Where we couldn't possibly work in something that we hated unless the money was just so ludicrous that it completely changed the balancing act. And for most people, and many of the people listening to this who are quite value driven, the money still has to be of a particular level and the job still has to be of a particular level to actually fulfill you. So does your side hustle, because if you just dive into this side hustle where you're drop shipping because you heard there's lots of money in that, but you absolutely hate it and it takes you loads and loads of time to get good at it, then you're not going to stick at it in 6 months' time, and it's maybe going to generate you a little bit of cash, but then you never get to the point, and we were talking about this offline, where you've maybe got enough experience or enough skin in the game that you start to benefit from compound interesting of your efforts previously. For the listeners, Laura and I were talking about me discovering Laura's blog to invite her on the podcast and seeing that there's so much more to her than just one particular article that I found. And of course, there's a lot of value from having this time in the game. And it would be the same with dropshipping. It would be the same with t-shirt embroidery, whatever you get up to. If somebody has like a bit of a back catalogue and a bit of work behind the scenes, then when it does kind of pop off, then you see that kind of hockey stick effect where it kind of peaks up, doesn't it? And you see the income rising. So I love that the big thing that you spoke about there was a lot about values and ideas and longer term planning than just, I'm going to earn £200 next month by doing this activity, which I've not really got any idea about and I don't really care about.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, if you can set yourself up from the very beginning, do your research. But I mean, you know, there is such thing as procrastination as well. But I think there's a middle ground where, you know, you can really research a topic well, get started, just get off to a really strong start, and then go from there. You know, if you learn more along the way, which you will, that's great. But I think taking the time to kind of map things out to begin with is just going to help you see results faster as well, I think. Yeah,
no doubt about it. What are some of the side hustles that sprung to mind when you were having considerations about what you might want to do?
All sorts, and I swear I have a new business idea every day. But yeah, I kind of considered selling vintage clothes online, upcycling. A lot of the ones that I considered were quite creative because I am really creative, but my job isn't particularly creative, so that was a really nice balance. I've also done freelance writing before, and I still do a little bit of that. It was things like a jewelry business I was thinking of doing, candle making. I've entertained a lot of different side hustle ideas, and sometimes you can get fixated on an idea for a few days, research, and then just think, actually, for whatever reason, maybe the startup costs are too much, like it's too unaffordable to begin with, or you know, the effort is, you'd have to put in way more effort than the amount of free time that you actually have. There's loads of different reasons why something might not work out, but when you're really, really excited about an idea, that is the time to go all in, research as much as you can, work out any potential pitfalls, and then decide if that idea is viable or not. And then you can go on and plan how you might do it. Yeah,
you've been helping people in this space recently. What are some of the exciting things that you've seen people do?
All sorts. Something that is really exciting. One of my kind of online friends is is doing candle making, and she has just done the most beautiful reels and different imagery around the candles, and I just think her example is amazing, because she's gone all in with the social media from the get-go, which I think has really helped her. You know, she already knew what she wanted her brand to be, and it's a luxury candle brand, and I think the name, the branding, the content that she's put out, the imagery that she's filmed and you know, taken photos of, it's really built that brand identity, and it has this cohesiveness, which I think is really effective. You know, I think sometimes you can see people might start off with a certain style and then it evolves into something else, and it's just not quite got that really strong brand identity. But yeah, she really does with this page, and yeah, she's doing well.
That's great. And I think you can see there that she's committed to something that she's done a lot of research on, in terms of what her audience is going to be like, what kind of content she needs to produce towards it, what kind of product she needs to produce to meet that need. And that planning stage and that value-driven choice is really exciting. And I've joked before, when I've actually been interviewed on podcasts, that I look at some of my kind of podcast sponsorship or Instagram sponsorship or like photo shoot money as like my investment for crypto money. And for the last 18 months, that's kind of all gone in there. And it's kind of felt like, oh, that side hustle money is now just like investment money to enable my financial freedom earlier. And if that means that kind of traditional 10-15% that a lot of us talk about investing of our post-tax salary, if you can do that and top it up with side hustle money, then you're just bringing forward your potential retirement date, and you're enabling financial freedom at a much sooner age.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really exciting to think of that side hustle income as extra. And you know, I speak to people sometimes and they say, you know, I could never put aside £300 a month from my salary. And I'm not saying everyone has the time to do a side hustle. Not everyone does, and I totally understand that. Like, if you've got a family and things, it might just not be possible. You've got other commitments. But if you can, and you do want to explore that, earning more and increasing your income can actually be a better way to go than cutting back on your spending, especially if you're already operating at quite a reduced budget, just in order to save some money. I think a way to get forward is by earning more money, which, you know, you can do by either asking your employer for a pay rise, or you could do both, or doing a side hustle income on the side. So yeah, I think it's definitely, I don't know, I think it's important to remember that you're not tied to your employer as your only source of income. There are these other options.
Yeah, you speak so passionately about it. And I think during the course of this discussion, we've outlined both that first way that we spoke about in terms of cutting back and making more thrifty choices and kind of living on a little bit less to enable us to invest more. But then, of course, giving us that second revenue stream, which can enable financial freedom quicker, so that we can up that allocation to that fabled 300 or going beyond that, and making ourselves more likely to be financially free the sooner that we go, but also living more comfortably, because it might well be that your side hustle income, so to speak, becomes like spending money or fun money as well, which I think's an exciting prospect too.
Yeah, for sure. You know, it's totally up to you what you spend your money on. And I think, you know, by getting to know our spending better, we're kind of getting to know ourselves better as well. Because I don't know about you, but I think money can be something that we kind of gloss over and we put to the back of our minds a lot of the time. We don't spend a lot of time paying attention to it, or definitely not as much attention as we do to other areas of our lives. Yeah, it tells us so much about ourselves to start with, and also you know, it can really be a great tool to do more of what we love to do. So yeah.
Yeah, a lovely message for us to wrap up on, Laura. So if people want to continue the conversation with you, where should they head towards?
You can find me at Thrifty Londoner on Instagram and on thriftyLondoner.com, which is my website.
Perfect, Laura. Those will both be linked in the show notes below. I'm sure you've all enjoyed this episode. So if you have done, please take a screenshot, pop it in your Instagram story, tag me at call.cambro, tag Laura, and leave us a 5-star rating if you're listening on Spotify or Apple. And I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.